Hello everyone. Having finally reached the lofty heights of 2,000 subscribers, which I know sounds sarcastic, but actually I'm really chuffed with that, I wanted to celebrate by stepping outside of my comfort zone and answering questions posed by you, dear audience. This is going to be, broadly speaking, unscripted, so forgive me if it's a little bit clumsy. Let's get into it. Evil Ninja Phil asks, favourite media from the year 2000? So I had a little look at this one because I'm not very kind of au fait with what years things came out particularly. So I just went through some lists and I kind of chose three things, one for games, one for albums and one for films. At the time I wasn't a big reader so I couldn't really do books for that one, but Games-wise, I think Majora's Mask is obviously right at the top there. That was a massive game for me. I pretty much cut my teeth on Ocarina of Time, so the sequel to that was something I was kind of pretty much dreaming about the first moment I saw the first images of it in, I think it was N64 magazine at the time. Really interesting game. It's kind of like the template for a lot of time loop games now, I think. I know it was probably not the originator of that kind of subgenre, but it does really interesting things. Obviously it has this schedule with all your NPCs and this kind of like quite tense but actually quite fair kind of time limit to getting things done, and it's got this kind of like nice loop of things you have to do in one cycle and things that kind of, when you achieve them, stick around the first time you go back in time. So that's a really interesting game. I think it's really good. I don't know, I haven't played it since, so I have no idea if I'll still like it in this year of our Lord 2024, but in terms of like a game that I hold a lot of dear memories about from the year 2000, that's the one there. Albums wise, again, at that time I was 13. I wasn't listening to a lot of great stuff, we'll be honest, but I was around about that time I was starting to cut my teeth on some more interesting things. So for me, I think my favourite album from 2000 was probably PJ Harvey's Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea. That's a great album. It's full of really interesting tunes. I'm just going to have a look up the actual track list now. From the City, Stories from the Sea, PJ Harvey. I really love PJ Harvey. She's a really interesting artist. She has got like a lot of different types of music. At the time I was also listening to things like Nick Cave as well, and obviously there's a lot of symbiosis between their styles of music, and also I think they used to go out as well, which doesn't come as a surprise to most people. Kind of big kind of gothic kind of vibes to both of them. But just look at the track list. First track on there, Big Exit, banger. Then you've got The Horse Hustle, Hustler's Whore, banger. Kamikaze, banger. Horses in My Dream, banger. We Float, banger. That's just a really cool album full of interesting tunes. That's a really, I can't recommend that album enough. Films-wise, I was going to go a bit pretentious with this one. I was thinking about things like, there's a really decent horror film from the year 2000 called What Lies Beneath, which stars Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer, and that's just a really good like demonstration of two actors, just like the chemistry between two actors and their gravitas, and that kind of seal. Like it's a decent kind of like murder mystery / ghost story, but it's all held together by these two really solid performances. Actually, what my favorite film from the year 2000 is probably Road Trip, which is a sex comedy, a pretty puerile one at that. But give that one a look if you want something funny to watch. Thanks for the question, Evil Ninja Phil. Nico Blass asks, I'd actually like to hear your thoughts on the recent Microsoft news closing several studios. I'm sure it's never as simple as they stupid or whatever, but I did love Hi-Fi Rush and Prey. Hopefully they rebuild under other publishers. So obviously Arcane Austin made my favourite game of all time, Dishonored. I have nothing but high praise for that and the studio that made it. I find the whole thing just very depressing. However, I think there's some other structural things going on that are part and parcel of this, and it's not just the case of them being kind of cruel. I think there's just there's a wider problem of, we have this expectation of what games look and feel like nowadays. That process is expensive and long-winded, and it's functionally incompatible with capitalism. The question we ask is, how do like things that, like, you know, let's just take, I know it wasn't Arcane Austin that made it, it was Leon, but like Dishonored 2 is probably one of the best looking games I've ever seen in my life. How does a game like that get made without a massive cash injection? Nowadays, it's a little bit easier to kind of make games that look really good and have like high production values, but even still, there is a certain level that you get to where you just can't do that without AAA money. Do these things deserve to exist in the first place, given the circumstances around building them? I don't know, because I know there's some examples of AAA studios and publishers that actually have good working practices and kind of are quite respectful of the teams that build them together, and they're kind of quite coherent. There are so many different things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. I'm not an expert on the industry at all. I know what I read from like various like publications. The bigger problem, I think, is also that you can't rely on a publisher being good, because it doesn't work like that. Anyone who's in a business to make money will make decisions based on that. And because of the way that the actual economy works and how these businesses operate, shareholders, things like that, they are going to be primarily motivated by how their end-of-year reports, fiscal reports will look, regardless of what the actual long-term damage of their decisions are. These people do not look into the future. They do not care about these prospects. This is why you've got, like, with the situation with Hi-Fi Rush, which was a game that came out to quite high critical acclaim, made quite a lot of money for Microsoft, and they still shut it down. And one of the reasons they shut it down was the studio, for their next project, they wanted to spend that time on it. They didn't want to just chuck out, say, for example, Hi-Fi Rush 2 next year. And that's it's an industry-wide problem. It's an economy-wide problem. It's this idea that the owners of the means of production, these kind of big economic actors, are obsessed with this idea of exponential growth, a thing that doesn't exist. It cannot exist. There is a kind of a high ceiling on what's possible. I think probably we are going to see, as a result, I think we're going to see with these big budget games, we're probably going to see less interesting stuff in the future. The upside of this, obviously, is that we're going to see a lot more interesting indie games, and I think especially 2024 has shown that there's just a phenomenal amount of really creative, interesting, beautiful work out there. We just need to be funding it. And what was the interesting thing from this year's Summer Games Fest that I found was that there was seemed to be a lot of conversation around actually just putting money into smaller projects. So you've got things like, obviously, the Blumhouse Games kind of thing, I can't remember the name. The Among Us developers have that new games fund, which is really interesting. Whether or not that's just another set of shackles for these kind of like developers and smaller studios, I don't know, because I think people were saying good things about things like Game Pass in the past, and obviously looks what happened. I don't know what's going to happen, I'm going to be honest. I'm really bummed out about both of those things. I thought Tango Gameworks was an excellent studio. I only really played that Ghostwire Tokyo and Hi-Fi Rush. I thought Hi-Fi Rush was absolutely brilliant. I would have loved to have seen what they were going to do next, but we'll see what happens. Maybe the key players in that team will kind of form something else down the line. I don't know. Thanks for the question, Nico Blas. Sega Driven says, well deserved. Thank you very much. Go check out Sega Driven's work. They do a lot of interesting stuff on things like Sonic and like fan games and stuff. Really recommend that channel. Their question is, how do you tackle the fallout when you release a video? Do you let it breathe and feel satisfied with a job well done, or do you instantly write it off and go, right, what's next? I know I have a hard time of actually sitting back and appreciating what I've made, and I always look forward to the next thing. I'm kind of the same. I don't really have an ego about my work, so it's not a case of like I kind of put something out there and I just immediately feel bad about it. I've actually probably, like, I'd say every couple of months or so, I will go back to some of my older videos and watch them as if I'm watching a new video essay. Try and kind of look at them from the perspective of an audience. And I find myself quite surprised at actually how much I enjoy my own work in that process. However, when I release a video, I tend to not think about it for at least a couple of weeks, months even, afterwards. Part of it is I've just got so much stuff going on at the moment, both like in my day job and a lot of my other writing projects, that I don't really have time to kind of mull. The other part of it is that the actual process of making my videos is very intensive. I do a lot of work on my script first and foremost, and I think I spend a lot of time thinking about the process of writing, not just like the content of the words, but actually the way the words are delivered. So by the time I get round to obviously doing the recording and then going back editing the audio, so I'm listening to my own voice, and then I'm listening to my own voice again when I'm editing the videos, at a certain point I'm just like, I've spent too much time on this. It's the same of like, imagine if you watched, I don't know, if you watched Jurassic Park like 10 times in a row over a couple of weekends, you'd probably be like, no, I'm done with Jurassic Park for a bit. But then you can, a little while down the line, you can go back and go, oh yeah, this is the best dinosaur movie of all time. It's interesting, like obviously, because I've been doing this, I've been running this channel for about seven or 8 years now, and my processes have changed over that course of that time. When I was first thinking about like the past videos I put out, a lot of them were kind of quite like shabbily edited, and I was using quite rudimentary software to actually make them. Going back, I was just like very surprised that actually the quality of them was still quite decent. I think it's important, obviously, not to be fearful for the quality of your work. I think you have an internal QA kind of process that even if you're not, for example, I write, record, edit, publish all of my stuff by myself. I don't really have much input from other members of the community, but even like in that sort of circumstance, I have my own QA process for thinking about, like, I wouldn't especially at this stage, I wouldn't put a video out unless I was sure it was going to be worth watching. And then sometimes you go back because you just get like a little brief uptick in views of an older video because of things that happen. Like Before the Green Moon got obviously a Switch port recently, and as a result of that I had a kind of some interest in a video I made last year about that game. And that was a video I had a sort of almost Mandela affected an idea of what that video was in my head as not being that great. Like the delivery of the audio wasn't great, the editing, the actual pacing of the video. But then I actually went back to it, because of the interest, and because I was watching a couple of other quite interesting video essays about that game, and it's a brilliant game. I absolutely love that game. So I went back and looked at my own words on it, and I actually realised, actually it was a good video. It was a video worth watching. It didn't waste your time. It was very informative. It was very kind of colloquially like poetic, like a lot of my work is, and it was good, and I enjoyed it. So yeah, I'll go into this because there's another question down the line about the processes and kind of how the psychology of kind of like dealing with your own feelings about your own work. So I'll go into that a bit further in another question. But I just think, it's an interesting one. I think you have to just remember, when you're creating something, the first person you should be creating it for is for yourself. And then as a result of that, because you're spending so much time on that process, you will need to take a step back from it and have a break from it. And sometimes that break comes in the form of like working on another project. Sometimes it comes in the form of just taking a brief hiatus, just chilling out, like engaging with other things for a bit. You got to take these breathers. Thanks for the question, Sega Driven. Echoin asks, which unreleased indie games are you excited for the most? A lot of them, basically. I've made a little kind of rudimentary list of sort of some of the things. Some of it's announced, some of it's stuff that I'm assuming is getting made at some point in the future. So I was thinking about obviously things like Earthblade, that new game by Maddie Thorson, which kind of looks interesting. It's like it's either kind of the Metroid-like style, but obviously with the design sensibilities of Celeste, Maddie's previous game. That looks really cool. Dungeons of Hinterberg looks amazing. I'm quite excited to when that finally comes out. I think it's out really soon as well, so I'm kind of excited for that. Whatever Cosmo D's up to next, he's shown on his Twitter a few things from what he's calling Game 5. If you're not familiar with Cosmo D's work, I made a video about his work quite a while ago. I'll pop a link in the description. He just makes some really weird, kind of far out, kind of maximalist kind of adventure games. So I'm really excited for what that next one ends up being. Big Walk, which is the next game from the Untitled Goose Game devs. That looks really interesting because it's kind of... It's a sort of diegetic kind of multiplayer game about kind of exploring and finding one another across vast landscapes, from what I can gather from the trailer. That looks really interesting. Demon School, which is a cool like kind of tactics game. I played a demo of that, I think it was last year, and that was like really interesting. It's got a kind of almost like if any of you remember the early days of like pre-smartphone kind of mobile phone games, there was a kind of very specific kind of pixel art style to those which Demon's School seems to kind of evoke. So that's I'm quite excited about that. Just from like aesthetically, it looks really interesting. SteamWorld Heist 2, very excited for that. The SteamWorld games, I don't think there's ever been a dud. Although I haven't finished playing SteamWorld Build. I thought that was interesting. It was a slightly different studio, so I don't know about that one. But like the first SteamWorld Heist was amazing. I'm really excited to see what they do with this one, because it looks like there's some sort of pirate ship combat stuff going on with it as well. That's cool. The Promise Mascot Agency. That's the game by I can't remember the studio's name now, but it's the people who made Paradise Killer, and they've made obviously a kind of a big kind of sprawling kind of adventure game with sort of weird kind of like Suda 51-esque kind of vibes to it, and they've really sold it well in that kind of announcement trailer. I'm really excited for that, and it's basically I'm just really interested in whatever the people who made my favorite indie games are doing next. So Project Dosa from the Thirsty Suitors and Falcon Age devs, that looks really interesting. Inkel's been pulling out just loads of really interesting kind of adventure games and sort of text games and things like that, so whatever they do next is obviously going to be great. Eastward, which is a game that came out a couple of years ago, which I've really absolutely adored. It's kind of like a Zelda-like in the tone of Minish Cap. It's got that kind of style of art style. If they end up doing something next, so I know they've just released some DLC for that, which I haven't touched yet, but they do like the next game, and I hope they do. I know one of the sad statistics of like indie development is that a lot of like studios or groups of collaborative efforts between people, cooperatives and things, a lot of them just release like 1 or 2 games and then just sort of quietly disappear into another industry because they're just not making any money from it, and that's a little sad. So I hope the Eastwood devs do something next. Terry Kavanagh, who made Dicey Dungeons and Mr. Platformer, I'd love to see what he's up to next. That would be great. In terms of like stuff that was shown off at the Summer Games Fest and Day of the Devs and stuff recently, because there's been a slew of new really exciting looking indie games. I did a Substack post about that a couple of weeks ago, so I'll pop a link in the description for that. But Phoenix Springs was the thing that comes to mind for that. That was an absolutely gorgeous looking kind of, I can't remember who said it best, it was kind of almost like, it was like ink on like newspaper kind of style art, like adventure game. So it was sort of very it's an unusual art style I've not seen anywhere else. That looks amazing. I think that's kind of going to be really good. There's too many indie games out there that I want to play. My Steam wish list is coming up to about 300 at the moment. That's including like games already released. I've still got stuff on my plate, like stuff in my backlog that I'm really excited to get stuck into eventually when I have time. There's so much stuff going out there, and we just need to make sure we're actually supporting it. So yeah, loads of unreleased stuff, loads of stuff that's just been released. I feel like I'm almost kind of bordering on a panic attack thinking about it. Thanks for your question, Echoing. Video Games Are Bad says, "Hi Tom, congrats on 2K. Thank you, Harry. Appreciate it. Go and check out Video Games Are Bad. It's a great channel." So Harry asks, as a channel that has been making videos for such a long time, how have you fared with keeping up motivation? Also, more importantly, what's your go-to Greg's order? So I answered a little bit of this in Sega Driven's question earlier, but basically my motivation is I have more ideas I'm enthusiastic about than I actually have time to execute them. I have a Google Doc full of ideas, like hundreds of ideas. I have things mulling around in the back of my head all the time. Obviously at the moment I've sort of kind of ruined my life by having this big backlog project I'm working on, which, I mean, that's sarcasm. I am actually really enjoying that project because it's making me think about the process of actually how I play games a little bit more. But in terms of actually, like, while I'm doing that, I'm not doing other things. So like I've got there's probably about 5 or 6 other video ideas that I would have liked to have worked on this year, which I don't know how many of those I'm going to actually execute, but it doesn't really matter because then whichever ones I don't get around to, I'll get around to in the next year. That's what's keeping me motivated. I love doing this. I love making videos. I don't even actually care about any of like the metrics or the analytics or like I'm really happy with the audience I've got at the moment. I always get really nice comments from the people who watch my videos. I've managed to kind of foster, although I'm not a very social person, I'm not very engaged online either, I've managed to foster quite a nice community here as well. So the fact that I can not worry about that side of things and just focus on making stuff that I want to make, and obviously this goes hand in hand with the other work I do, so obviously the Substack that I do, so I do weekly essays on that, weekly posts on that as well, and then also I've got other sort of writing projects that I work on the side. So if I'm getting really fed up with a specific video script, I might just kind of shelve it for a week and go and do something else. So an example of this is obviously, if you look at my last two videos, so that's the Necessary Cruelty of Hard Games and the Balatro Paradox. So I started working on the Necessary Cruelty video probably quite a while ago. And then I was working on it kind of improper, probably from about February, March time this year. But I hit a kind of a wall with it where I wasn't really happy with the kind of the script or how it was working. And at the time, obviously, I was playing loads of Balatro because, you know, everyone was playing loads of Balatro. So I just kind of like took a breather, did something else for a bit, and then came back to it. And the result is I've had two videos that have been quite successful, and I actually think are really good. That's that. As for my go to Greggs order, I don't really go to Greggs. I'm not really into pastries either, which seems like an odd, admission for an Englishman. However, the times I have been to Greggs, I mean, I did quite enjoy their focaccia pizza. There you go. Thanks a lot, Harry. Right, let's see if I can get this one right. Maximian Coelho 4496 asks multiple questions. I'll start with the first one. For how long have you been a gamer? I'm asking, since when did you have the capacity to break down each game to their essential details and analyse them more profoundly? Quite a simple answer to this. So I have been gaming since about the age of 9. So for context, I am 37. Basically, I kind of cut my teeth on the N64 era, and I've been gaming pretty much non-stop ever since. However, it's only been probably in the last 10 years or so that I've actually been thinking about analysis as a kind of process of enjoying games as well. So that's kind of started around about the time of things like so obviously, I was reading kind of games magazines from an early age, and I was quite enjoying those and reviews and things, but I never kind of considered the idea of myself having the capacity to talk about games in any interesting way until much later on. So that's that question answered. The second question that Maximian Coelho 4496 asks was, do you paper and pen the ideas or write down notes and develop these things and these ideas into recording? So my actual process is probably not very efficient. So my first thing I tend to do is if I'm making a video about a game, I will play through the game, and I'll usually decide at the end that I want to make a video, and then I'll do a little bit of swearing because I've not taken any footage of it, but at that point I'll probably, I usually kind of form the idea for a video while I'm playing a game, and I'll kind of like, before a certain point I won't write anything down, it will just be in the back of my head. I might write like as I said in an earlier question, answered in an earlier question, I do have a Google Doc full of ideas, and sometimes I'll just write down like a basic premise for a video to come back to at a later date. So the actual thing is pretty much the only notes that I would actually make are when I'm actually starting to write the script, and a lot of the time I don't actually even do notes. I just tend to kind of write, and then obviously if things aren't working, I'll kind of get rid of those things or repurpose them. So by the time I get to the actual recording, I've got like a fully formed script that all of the ideas are in that script alone, and there isn't really much else that I do outside of that. So no pen and paper, a little bit of Google Docking sometimes, that's basically it. Question 3 is, do you plan on morphing the channel into something different than it is right now, or the process of making each video is a form of self-therapy? I'm basically asking if you're happy with the current channel performance, or if performance has nothing to do with the making the kind of content. So I kind of answered this one already. I'm not worried about the performance. I make things that I find interesting. If other people find interesting, that's great, and based on feedback, a lot of people do really enjoy my work. The actual evolution of the channel's gonna be an interesting thing, because it has been changing. If you've noticed, this year I've been making longer videos featuring like multiple games, for example. In the past I've also kind of dabbled in like non-games related stuff as well. So a few years ago I made a video called, I think it was titled Parasite Hobbyist, which was about my kind of obsession with MRE military ration pack review videos. So things like that, there is a possibility that I kind of go back to that in the future, but I mean, in terms of like how I'm doing things now, I think I'm probably going to stick with the multi-game video format for a bit, because it's actually they're quite easy to make and I really enjoy making them. And then every now and then I'll probably do like maybe a smaller, more concise kind of video essay in the process. I don't think you're probably going to see things like, I doubt I'm going to be doing streaming or anything like that, because as you can probably tell from how clumsy my delivery of the answers for these questions is now, I'm not very confident at ad-libbing. I do a lot of like heavily edited and heavily scripted work on this channel, and that will probably continue. And then just a little note at the end was, as I say in advance, I feel happy to have a place where I can hear someone speaking in depth about a game. I really enjoy indies and small games, which might not be what the algorithm favours, but I'm excited to the notification saying Static Canvas has a new video. And I just thank you for that comment, because I really appreciate that. I know the stuff that I make is often quite niche, and every now and then I'll pick up on something like a subject that's in the zeitgeist at the time, like with the Balatro Paradox. That video's done really well because it's a popular game, but I'm not actually interested in chasing trends, and I know, because I've done it in the past. I did a video about Elden Ring a couple of years ago that I was not, the intentions behind it weren't for the sake of actually doing something interesting, and I do appreciate that now, and I think that was a little bit of a hit and a miss, so I'm going to avoid stuff like that in the future. But thank you for your comments, Maximian Coel Ho 4496. I'm sorry if I've butchered your username. Thank you. Noradine715 says, congrats, Big Static. Man, I really want to change my channel name to that. That's good. Big Static. I like that. I also wish of making video essays such as yours, not to the letter, but essays on works I find interesting. The question is, how long did it take to learn to edit like this, and how long does editing a project take? So obviously I've been as I said before, I've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years. The process sort of evolves naturally over time. You start, basically, the only thing you really need to do is get yourself a good video editing program. So I started out using Windows Movie Maker, and then eventually I got a copy of Sony Vegas, so I use Vegas now. Just learning the basics of that to begin with, that's all you really need to know. Basically, you need to know about video channels and audio channels on that, and how those kind of work together, and then also getting yourself any kind of microphone. I don't think the quality matters at the beginning either. I use a Yeti mic. I'm probably going to continue using a Yeti mic until this thing packs in, so I'm quite happy with the kind of audio quality on that side of things. Some the big channels that they use things like After Effects and things and do fancy things. That's great, and some of those videos look amazing, and that's really cool. And then some people use like webcam to kind of talk on camera as well. I don't do that because I'm not confident in that process, and my in-person delivery is a little bit kind of like, I prefer the shroud of secrecy. I'm just hiding the fact that I'm just very ugly. Those are the kind of basics you need to know, and then it's just about basically developing your own style and practice over time. And in terms of writing, again, I can't really give you advice on that because I have a very specific way of writing. What I would actually say to you is this is something I don't do, and it's something I really recommend, because it's like I don't practice what I preach, but get yourself someone who will help edit your work. It's really good to have someone else looking over what you're saying and how you're saying it, and just seeing what works and what doesn't, because that can actually help you develop your practice over time and actually understand what your strengths are. Your own voice is the most important thing when it comes to making videos. I find, because I watch a lot of video essays and of varying degrees of quality, and the passion's always there, but some of them I find they get kind of very, and I guess I'm probably guilty of this as well in the past, where you kind of get into a very specific style that's very clearly based on one popular video essayist. So when I started out, I was aping a lot of Mark Brown's work and being quite kind of prescriptivist and kind of authoritative about what I was saying. And eventually I've kind of like mellowed out into this, actually I don't know what I'm saying, I'm just kind of going based on a kind of gut feeling and an understanding of the world. This is things that I basically developed over the time. So I've got about 90 odd video essays on my channel now, and the process over the time, when I first started out I was making a video essay every 2 weeks. Now obviously since then I started a new job, and I've actually annoyingly got a career now, so I have other things that kind of take up time in my life, so I can't really do one every 2 weeks, but also that's allowed me to kind of slow down and appreciate the process and understand the own rhythms and cadences of my own work, and hopefully it's kind of resulted in having a specific style that is more unique to me now, although I think I still riff on a kind of quite a few different other writers in the process. I'm just having a little look at my notes here. So my process for writing both words that are supposed to be read and words that are supposed to be heard is pretty much the same, because I think about like the rhythm of writing and the process of doing it that way. So because I think actually good rhythm in writing actually helps, it makes it easier to read and also easier to listen to. But in terms of editing a project, the actual time and amount of time it takes to edit a project depends on the nature of the video. The process of making a video, so previously I'd kind of said to myself 4 or 5 hours per every minute of video. I don't think that's necessarily true anymore because of the way my editing process has changed now. So in terms of, I just want to give you an example. So the actual writing process is the thing that takes up the most time when making my videos, and I will probably spend a month, 2 months on the writing process, and then the actual making of the video, usually it's like over a weekend. So depending on obviously things like getting footage for the video, that sometimes takes a bit longer, but if I've already got the footage and obviously now I'm better, now that I have more knowledge about the process of how I do my videos, I actually kind of prepare a bit better now. But just for an example, say like a 10-minute video, I probably spend an hour recording the audio, and then probably 3 to 4 hours actually editing the video afterwards. It depends. I mean, I've got a horrible attention span, so over an afternoon of editing, I'll usually stop and do something else for an hour or so, and then come back to it. But yeah, it can be a time-consuming process, but that's kind of really much going to be based on your own standards and what you want from your videos, what you want your videos to look like. I do very rudimentary edits on my videos. I am not interested in being flashy. I've got nothing against people who do make flashy videos. I think there's some really interesting video essayists out there who do actually absolutely incredible stuff with things like After Effects. There is a channel, and I can't remember the name of the channel, but he does this stuff where he superimposes himself into the footage of the game. If I remember the name, I'll pop a link in the description, but his essays are really interesting, but then also he has this extra layer of like kind of pizzazz on top of it, and that's cool, and you can do that. I don't, because part of it is I just don't have the time, and part of it's just I'm not interested in that. I think the quality of my words is the most important thing for me. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers at least a little bit of that. The actual thing about making a video is you just need to make the video and you need to put it out there. And I think every video essayist will agree with me that when you first start out, you will not feel very confident about the quality of your work, and you might look back on it once you've got a bit more experience under your belt and think, but the thing is, you just got to keep working at it. No one creates a masterpiece on day one. So thanks for your question, Noradine715, and let me know if you do release any videos, and I'll give them a watch. The Grand 5473 asks, what's the oldest work of, say, prose, films, games, etc. that you are wholeheartedly enamoured by? So I'm a bugger for this, because I'm actually mostly interested in contemporary works of art. And like, if I go back in terms of historical works, it's mostly going to be like 20th century, like late 19th century stuff. However, there are a few things that I kind of really love from earlier eras. I think in terms of films, Some Like It Hot I think is probably one of my favourite kind of older films. I've been kind of trying to be a bit better about like engaging with a lot of stuff from the past. I've kind of working my way backwards, so I've done obviously the 90s, I've done the 80s, I've done the 70s, but going back into sort of 40s and 50s and stuff, I've only watched a few things. Some Like It Hot, Barefoot Contessa, things like that. I tell you what, the Barefoot Contessa is probably one of my favourite films. It's just an absolute blinder of a film. Games wise, I grew up on obviously N64 PS1 era, so that's the stuff that I kind of mostly gel with. I have gone back to previous like 16-bit and 8-bit era games. I've played a few of them, enjoyed them. You know, we've all played Chrono Trigger and things like that, and obviously the early Final Fantasies, they're great as well. The interesting thing about games, and this is something Zalavia Nelson Jr. said in a podcast with Jim Trinker that I can no longer find, that all eras of gaming are happening at the same time. So the actual historical aspect is kind of more of it's less to do with genre and style and more to do with just a block of time, like the actual logistics of the passage of time. Books wise, again, mostly contemporary stuff, but I've read a few of the classics. So I've read some kind of like Philip K. Dick, and I've read some, I know Philip K. Dick's not like early prose, but I do also, I think some of like D.H. Lawrence's stuff is really interesting. Struggled a bit with Sons and Lovers, but I really adored Lady Chatterley's Lover. That's a book that actually kind of jump-started me back into reading properly again, because I read that on a particularly miserable coach ride back from Bestival back in like say 2015, I think. So that kind of that stuck in my mind quite a bit. I think I really adored that. And I've recently gone, I'm sort of kind of working my way back historically, so I'm still working in kind of contemporary eras with fiction. I do need to go back and read some of the classics because I know a lot of them are actually just genuinely brilliant. So that's the kind of thing. And then I don't, again, it's one of those things that I don't actually have a particular reason why I am so enamored with modern stuff versus kind of older stuff. It's not to do with any kind of like moral objection to the sensibilities of the past or anything like that. And I do appreciate that there's a lot of great work that if we don't continue cherishing it now, it's going to kind of get lost to time. I suspect that's probably not a particularly interesting answer for you, the Grand 5473, but that is my answer, so thank you for asking. Morning Dirge asks 5 questions. So let's start with the first one. What has been your main inspiration for starting this YouTube channel? A lot of people in the community, they're probably going to answer the same kind of basic answer to this, which is essentially like channels like Game Maker's Toolkit is going to be a big one for a lot of people, and it was a big one for me. I was watching Mark Brown's videos, I became aware of then smaller channels who were doing interesting things from there. So things like Writing on Games, Hamish Black, he's really influenced a lot of my writing, including because Hamish's work, although a lot of it's analytical, and he does a lot of work on obviously the state of industry and stuff, he does have actually quite an artistic flair to the kind of flourish to the quality of his work, so that's obviously influenced me. The Jesse Garasha, he's now doing work, some really good work with NoClip, but he used to have a channel called Chidunda, which also made some really good video essays, and that's obviously been a source of information for me, especially in my early days. Thin Reaper as well as a channel that isn't particularly that active anymore, and I think it's just because of life things got in the way, but he did a lot of really interesting stuff that I think influenced me. There is a tabletop like pen and paper kind of writer creator who named Snow, their channel isn't particularly active anymore, but they used to do these really interesting video essays. There's one in particular which I'll link in the description called Hades Walkthrough, which was she was talking about the experience of playing Hades while also dealing with disability, and that was a really interesting kind of quite a personal essay, and that's kind of something that I've really inspired by. And then of course there's obviously in more modern times, other than my inspirations, people like Harry Video Games Are Bad. His work's been brilliant and kind of like a nice foil for myself. There's an Australian YouTuber, Pixel a Day, Kat, who's doing incredible stuff at the moment, and she's done some, it's not just like her actual like essays kind of quite similar in tone and style to mine, just obviously from a different, some might argue more interesting perspective, so her work's really good, and she also recently did like a really fun little compilation video of doing that dance from Alan Wake 2. That was really good. So yeah, those are kind of the main kind of sources of inspiration for me, and then I just sort of like, obviously I've gone back in and looked at things like Tim Rogers, Action Button, Noah Caldwell-Gervais, Jacob Geller, which is interesting because a lot of those channels, although they're inspiring me now, a lot of those channels kind of came after me. And it's interesting when you look at someone who feels like such a fundamental part of the video essay community, and then actually they've only been active not that long. That's an interesting thing. So that's the answer to my first question. Second question from Morning Dirge is: your videos are very well written and are very articulate. Do you have any kind of background in writing, or was this channel your start? So my background is that I went to university. I did an undergrad degree in social sciences, so I did philosophy and politics. And then I did a master's degree in political science. Both of those required me to write a lot of essays, and do a lot of like analytical work at looking at, like, say, philosophical texts and social sciences texts, and kind of analysing that sort of side of things. So the actual structural work of an essay, that's my background from there. The actual other side of the writing, what I would say is the more interesting side of the writing, comes from the fact that I've just been writing since I've just been very young. Like, I've always been writing. As a child I was writing, as a teenager I was writing. I did dabble in poetry a little bit. You will never see any of that poetry. I will take it to my grave. However, it is out there in the ether. I've actually written a couple of books which they've not been published, and I don't know if they ever will. There's one I've gone back to now, where I'm looking at that now. But that's so I kind of do a lot of kind of creative writing outside of the work I do on the channel, and that kind of informs the quality of the actual writing on the channel. Question 3: is this YouTube channel your main writing outlet, or do you write other things? So I've already answered that. So I do a lot of different things like fiction and things like that. So it's just a fundamental part of most of my hobbies now, is writing. Question 4: do you have any other hobbies outside of video games and video essays you're comfortable talking about? So, not really. I do. One of the things that's been happening this past year is I've been taking a kind of a more active interest in my health. So I've been exercising a lot more, and I've been doing things like Couch to 5K and stuff. And I actually found out, annoyingly, I quite like exercise. So I don't know if you count that as a hobby, but that's something I do outside of games and stuff. I watch a lot of films. I like to go to the cinema. It's been a really good couple of years for cinema. I've been really eating well in terms of like cinematic stuff. So I like to watch a lot of what I would call wanky films, like a lot of kind of European stuff and like intellectual stuff as well. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like a little, a bit of the old Michael Bay from time to time as well. So that's the main things. And then also I do like to cook. That's been waning a bit recently. I've just found myself not with the energy or enthusiasm to do so, but I have a lot of recipe books, and I do like to cook from various things. I like to do a lot of like cooking from South Asian kind of recipes, Italian recipes as well. So a lot of continental stuff. I would count. I mean, that's sort of a hobby, and sort of just like the nature of I want to eat something nice. That's how I do it, because I live alone, so I have to make the things that I want to eat. And the final question is, what's your favourite game genre, and what's your least favourite? So I think probably on paper my favourite game genre is RPGs, specifically JRPGs. I cut my teeth on Final Fantasy. I cut my teeth on like a lot of like those early kind of JRPGs, things like Skies of Arcadia and the Tales of series and things like that. So that's obviously informed a lot of what the kinds of things that I enjoy. I mean, more recently, because of how my tastes have evolved over time, I also really like the immersive sims. So I love things like Deus Ex, Dishonored, a lot of the new modern immersive sims that are coming out in the indie sphere. That's kind of probably that thing. In terms of least favourite, I mean, there are some genres I just do not engage with, and it's not because I don't like them, it's just I'm not interested in them. So fighting games I just don't gel with those. I'm just not interested. Things like sports games as well. A lot of multiplayer stuff I just don't really enjoy. And it's not that I look at a game and think that's a bad game or I just don't like it. It's just like I think of it as just like an entirely different side of games that I'm just not like engaging with. So yeah, and then just a final Morning Dirge just had a final point just to say, love your poetic take on video game essays and can't wait to see more. So thank you for that, I really appreciate that, and thanks for your questions. Mega Slippers asks, how do you think games and the industry will develop and change over the next 5 to 10 years? Do you have any inkling of how your engagement with it might change? So I've already sort of answered this in that question about the Microsoft bullshittery, but I think the issue, we're going to have a massive crash in terms of big budget games coming up. I don't know if it'll be like specifically akin to the crash from the 80s, but we're going to hit a ceiling on how much we can do with projects that are designed specifically to impress us rather than just more generally engage us. And I'm already seeing in my own interests a massive drop off in how much I want to engage with big budget games. I've got a couple from this year that I bought and think, it's Dragon's Dogma 2 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, which I have been enjoying, but I just kind of like, I'm more interested in like the indie sphere now. I've already mentioned about things like the indie games that have been announced at the Summer Games Fest, and I wrote a post about this, which will be in the description. There was just a lot of really interesting looking stuff that was like smaller budget, and I think that, I hope that is going to be the future, where we're going to see more of that stuff, or more like maybe a return of the AA thing, where we just get like an actual smaller idea from a studio that just really have like a kind of passion for a specific type of game. Industry changes, I don't know. I think they're going to continue to push into live service guff and like the big push in AI stuff is going to happen, and it's going to suck, and it's going to be very disruptive, and I think a lot of people are going to just have their lives massively upended by it before they finally realise that it's a huge mistake and sunk cost fallacy and all that stuff. But once the dust settles, maybe a new, maybe slightly healthier paradigm will take over. Who knows? It's not looking good at the moment, but I am still quietly confident because I am still seeing really interesting stuff come out. And yeah, I'm still a bugger for an Assassin's Creed game, so I'm a hypocrite I may be, but that's the kind of thing that I am still I'm still quietly hoping and leading the cheer for. But yeah, so I think it's a case of we're going to see probably doubling down of the bad things now, and then eventually something will change. And it's a difficult question, Mega Slippers. I don't really know how to answer it, but thanks for asking. Honey Fox asks, what are some tiny games that you think deserve a shout out? Games that aren't really being recommended or talked about by many. So again, I've got a little list here. So just from this year alone, Botany Manor, which came out a few months ago, I think deserves more love. That was a really interesting kind of like puzzly detective game about growing plants, which had a really interesting story pushing along, like the actual narrative, and it's a game that's essentially about the kind of dismissive way that patriarchal societies kind of exclude female participation in like STEM subjects, and that was kind of the actual the background of what was just a really nice. It was a nice environment. It was a nice kind of load of puzzles. It was really interesting. It really looked really nice, and I think that was great, and I think that deserves more attention. Arctic Eggs, I've only played about sort of half an hour of, but that's a really fascinating little game that's just about frying eggs, but it's got this really fascinating mechanism for how it actually does the whole frying simulation of the frying of the eggs. It's almost impossible to engage with at first, but it's kind of a thing where you just build up a kind of like feel for how the physics of the game work, and then just the environment it's in is just really interesting. I played a little bit of it, but I need to go back to 1000X Resist might possibly be the best game of the year. I think more people need to be engaging with it. It's a fascinating like sci-fi story that's told from the perspective of kind of like a South Asian diaspora background, so that's like a unique perspective on a really cool story as well. It's about kind of delving into the past to kind of discover the origins of like a virus, and then also there's some kind of conspiracy stuff going on. I'm really looking forward to getting back into that one. I like a lot of what Merlino Games is doing. So this is Antonio Freire, is a Mexican developer who he made No Sun to Worship, which was part of my Cool Games for a Fiver video. He's also done something recently called Under a Star Long Cold. So he does kind of quite grotty Splinter Cell-esque games mostly, but also other things. But he's kind of like, he's doing that kind of PS1 or early PS2 era visuals, and like really like small, kind of concise, and kind of often quite revolting, like rotten games that are kind of like about nasty subjects, but like in an actual really interesting and kind of thoughtful way. His work, I think, deserves a lot more attention. Also, a lot of his games are like about £2-3. Like they're really cheap, and there's no reason not to play them. I played Ultros, a bit of Ultros earlier this year. That's a really interesting Metroidvania, brilliant art style, and a really fascinating kind of central mechanic, which is basically you're kind of doing, it's not quite a time loop, but you're kind of resetting yourself, you're resetting your game in order to progress. And it's kind of hard to explain what I mean about that without spoiling it, but because it's a game about kind of plants and planting seeds and things. Maybe you kind of get what I'm going on about, but that's definitely worth a look. That's really good. I need to get back into that as well. Basically, every week there's like a dozen good games that come out that are really cool and often really cheap, and they get very little mention in my circles. And I've got like loads of like my Steam wish list. There's about 80 games on there that are like a tenner or less, and those all look really fascinating. And I know for a fact some of them are actually really good, because I've heard from people whose opinions I value and trust that these things are really good. I just haven't had the time to get round to them. But yeah, there's probably more than that as well, but it's just like there's so much stuff. It's hard to find an avenue to properly like shout from the rooftops about a lot of these games. You just have to kind of, especially because of the way that social media works now, is you have these kind of pockets of interest in a thing that just kind of eventually go away, and it's only very few things that actually kind of have that lasting power. So there's a lot of like even like really brilliant stuff that gets talked about for maybe a week or two, and then just barely gets mentioned again. And it's sad, because it means that you kind of don't have this long tail on a lot of things that actually probably require a bit of time to digest and properly think about. And part of what I do with this channel as well is I don't want to just kind of, and this is why I don't want to chase trends and like do like kind of stuff that's just out, is I want to spend that time to think about what it is I actually really like about those games. So there's just a kind of collection of things that it's just from this year alone that I've just really enjoyed. Also, I've said before, like before the Green Moon just came out on Switch, and that game is bloody brilliant. I really like that. That's kind of like Harvest Moon by way of sort of Le Guin's The Dispossessed. So that's a really interesting like narrative heavy farming sim. Give that a go. If nothing else, just give that one a go, please. I want to talk to more people about that game. So yeah, thanks for the question, Honey Fox. And last but certainly not least, Jame9169 asks, how do you go about finding the lesser known games you highlight here? Most of it's from Twitter. I'm going to be honest. I kind of there's a couple of people I follow on Twitter who are really good about posting interesting weird games. Basically, I mean the main person that I kind of follow that I get a lot of these recommendations from is Dominic Tarras, and some of you might already be familiar with him. He's a games writer. He writes for a lot of different outlets, but he does a lot of work on Twitter about highlighting interesting kind of indie games. He is a diamond. Give him a follow. He also seems like a really great guy as well. So he's the main one. Obviously, other YouTube video essayists, I kind of like look at their work and see. So obviously, Cat from Pixel a Day, Eurothug 4000's always doing interesting videos on weird games. Spoken about Jesse from NoClip before. Him and Jeremy Jane, they both are big weird indie game heads, and they're all, especially on the NoClip Crewcast, which I think is a really good podcast. It's one of my go-tos that one of those podcasts I make a beeline for as soon as it's out every Friday, and they're almost always talking about something weird and interesting alongside the other two members of the podcast, Danny and Frank. So that's a kind kind of an avenue for that kind of thing. Jesse also posts a lot on his Twitter about these kind of things. So yeah, it's mostly Twitter. I also have I keep an eye on obviously the new releases on Steam and things like that. But a lot of the time it's just kind of chance encounters, and you see like a liked tweet from someone else, and you see like some work in progress, or like a screen grab or a GIF of a game just out in the ether, and you think, hang on, that looks really interesting and weird and striking. So you click on it and you go into it and you think, oh, actually, So I've been kind of making good use of my Steam wishlist to actually keep a tab on a lot of these work in progress projects as and when they kind of go along. So James also asks, what are your passions outside of games? I've already answered that one, but it's basically just like I do a lot of running and cinema and cooking, blah, 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 blah. And then he finally asks, how do you determine whether something will work better as a video or as an article on Substack? So I don't really have a formula for this, other than a broader thing of, listicles I tend to keep as a written format rather than a video format, because I think I think it's kind of very easy to slip into bad habits with listicles. I think there's some really good people who do good work with them out there, but I think it's just a little bit I think I want to use that as a kind of more of a kind of like a kind of soft and breezy kind of form of writing, as a kind of maybe like a break from more of the intense writing I do. I think the main kind of key qualifier that determines whether something's a Substack post or a video is how much of a pain in the arse it would be to edit the video. An example of this is a while back I wrote a post about Pentiment, the Obsidian game that came out a couple of years ago. I was originally working on that as a video script, and it was one of those classic things, and I said before, like I'll play through a game and then I'll decide to do the video at the end when I kind of like scream to the high heavens that I haven't actually gotten any footage from, so you have to kind of play through again. Part of the process of games, especially games like the sort of games that Obsidian make as well, where there's a lot of kind of variation based on choices you make, you have to play through multiple times as well, and I didn't have the time to do that at the time, so I just repurposed it into what I think is a pretty decent essay. So it really depends, and then sometimes I just want to kind of get some written stuff down because it's good for your portfolio. I've got a career in something other than writing, so I'm not too worried from that perspective, but I just think it's quite good. I mean, at some point I'd like to start pitching and getting some stuff published in some more formal outlets, or maybe in kind of physical formats, and I think it's good to have a body of written work for that, because as much as I value the quality of my work on YouTube, I think the style of a YouTube essay, although my writing style is pretty much broad across both mediums, I think that's sometimes things come across better on paper than they do with the spoken word, and sometimes the clumsiness of an execution of an idea can get in the way of something that just actually is much simpler and easier to convey on paper. I don't have any hard and fast kind of rules about that. I just think it's, that's how I do it. So occasionally you'll see something on my Substack and it'll probably be fairly obvious that it was once a video essay and now it's not. So yeah, there you go. So thank you very much, James9169, and thank you to everyone who posted questions for this video. I really appreciate the nice comments I get on all of my work. I think it's really good that I've kind of managed to foster such a nice community of people and such supportive people as well. Although I'm quite passionate about the thing and I do it for myself anyway, it is encouraging that other people are interested enough that over 2,000 of you have subscribed to the channel and continue to subscribe, which is, to me, that's just baffling. Can you just obviously as a kind of like a visual kind of identifier, can you imagine going to deliver a talk to 2,000 people? That would be that's a packed hall, isn't it? That's a lot of people interested in what you have to say, and that's very validating. So I really appreciate that. And just thank you all for your support over the years. This has been quite a good outlet for me on a more personal note, because my my day job is often quite taxing and emotionally draining, it's nice to have something I can kind of like have in the back of my mind that I'm passionate about, that I can kind of continue working on, that kind of, although it doesn't make anything okay, and especially as the world is not at its best now, it's just something, not necessarily as a distraction, but just something I can kind of do that makes actually every day, waking up every day, and it makes it kind of a bit more worthwhile, and I really appreciate that. So thank you all, and hope you look forward to what I've got planned next. So there'll be another volume of the Backlog Diaries that will be up at some point in the next couple of weeks, and then I've got a couple more essays that I haven't written yet, but I'm going to be working on. I haven't decided which ones are which, but once I do, I'll get those up in due course. But yeah, other than that, thank you very much for your time. If you've kind of gone this far into this video, then thank you for listening to my slightly kind of garbled rambles and a lot of umming and ahhing and kind of stuttering over speech. As I say, this is the first time I've done one of these kind of videos, so I'm not kind of very confident in that whole side of things. But yeah, thank you very much. As I say, check out the description on this video, because there'll be a lot of links to things I've talked about in the answers to these questions. And definitely go and check out some of the people that I've recommended, some of the other channels and some of the games I've recommended. There's a lot of really good stuff out there, and this whole community is just full of bright and brilliant people who are producing works of art. Thank you very much. All the best. Ta-ta.